like to call the meeting of the special committee to order. We have two main items on our agenda. They are to hear recommendations from the vice mayor on proposed special counsel, and then to follow that with a discussion with the auditor about his scope of work. So we'll begin by turning it over to the vice mayor to let him describe his process and what he has to present to us. And I'll give you the mic as soon as I find it. I've hit all three.
All right. I don't know if it's on.
I think you are.
Am I on? Okay. So, it's fine. This is fine. I sent you all a fairly lengthy email, a short letter, a long email today that went through the process that in which I engaged to make a recommendation to the council. The highlights are that after the last meeting, I think the very next day, I drafted a letter outlining what the council wanted and sent it to the Nashville Bar Association, the Tennessee Bar Association, and the Napier-Luby Bar Association here in Nashville. I additionally, even before I got the letter out to them, I started to get inquiries about firms that might be interested in doing the work. So that letter went out to, I think, 13 or 14 firms, maybe 15 altogether. I ended up getting back a fair amount of correspondence back and forth. Ultimately, 9 firms sent information to me that was sufficient for me to look at and make a determination of the adequacy of the firm in terms of its ability to undertake this representation. And to look, I asked specifically in the letter for some information about not only about their capabilities, but also about their efforts in promoting diversity in the legal field, which is, as Councilman Mendez can say, an important priority in the legal community. So I looked through, and Council Lady Gilmore and Council Lady Haywood had encouraged me to use a rubric to sort of score these firms. And I'll be honest with you, as I started doing it, everybody was sort of ending up with the same score because they were all qualified. They all were demonstrating efforts in terms of diversity. None of them had a legal conflict. So once I sort of abandoned that after I'd spent some time trying to go through it, and I just decided that they were all qualified. Once I did that, I spent some time thinking about what was going to be best for the city and for this council in terms of what kind of representation we wanted. I didn't want it to be somebody I knew, frankly, because then I'd be, people might see it as my doling out a favor to somebody. I didn't want it to be somebody who had a lot of contacts with the administration or the mayor. I didn't want it to be somebody lobbying the council. So I just sort of added all that up, and the result was that I decided to look outside of Nashville. I wanted it to be a Tennessee firm initially. That was my first choice because Tennessee firms are going to be more familiar with Tennessee law. And it wouldn't be somebody who would have to come up to speed on the law. We had two DC firms that sent me information about really high-flying firms, and but the cost of a DC firm, both in terms of travel and their billing rates, is just probably more than we needed to undertake, was my gut on it. So that left me with 2 Memphis firms to look at that had sent information in. One is Birch, Porter, and Johnson, and it is exclusively a Memphis firm. The lead applicant or the lead lawyer is a guy named Mike Cody, who has a long, distinguished career and impeccable reputation here in the state of Tennessee. Former Attorney General for the state of Tennessee, a former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee, notably was a lawyer for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. back in the 60s, so has got just a really spectacular career. His team would also include another gentleman who has got a great reputation, and two younger lawyers, an African-American lady and a white woman would also be on their team. I looked at, you've all got their bios, great people, totally capable. And if I stopped right now and y'all decided to pick them, there would be really no question that we'd be doing great. On the other hand, Edward Stanton III is also, he's at Butler Snow, which is not just a Memphis firm, it is a regional firm, and it including a Nashville office. But Mr. Stanton is, I spoke with him 2 days ago, and he made it very clear to me that he really has very few Nashville connections whatsoever. He went to a Tennessee law school, so he knows some Nashville lawyers. He's got no relationship whatsoever with Metro government or the mayor. And I will point out that he was nominated by President Obama to the federal judiciary, and never, because of the delay in Washington on getting votes on things, he never actually got a vote. But the fact that he was nominated, I think, would be a pretty clear indication that he's been vetted very strenuously, and that we're not ever going to learn that there's anything but the highest possible moral standards and ethical standards with Mr. Stanton. So now it is a regional firm, which is different from just a local firm. So I talked with Mr. Jameson just a few minutes ago, and I guess the way I would characterize the choice for y'all to make is between two highly qualified, very capable groups of people. Either one can do a great job with this. Mr. Stanton is a regional firm, may have a little bit more in terms of resources. The Burge Porter firm maybe has a tiny bit more experience when it comes to dealing with Tennessee municipal law than Mr. Stanton does. So that's sort of how I would, if I were trying to see what the difference between the two is, if I didn't want to just flip a coin, that's probably the decision I would make, would be to pick between those two perspectives. The fees were essentially the same. Mr. Stanton's firm said that they would be charging $425 and down for lawyers. Burge Porter was $395 and down for their costs. I know it sounds like a lot. It is a lot of money, but I will say that for lawyers with their level of experience and stature, it is a significant discount on what they would bill in the private sector. Both of them offered us the public sector rate, which is, it is a lot of money an hour. Don't get me wrong, but it is a significant discount on what their going rates are. The Burge Porter also said that they would not be charging for travel time. I'm confident that, I have not had a chance to talk to Mr. Stanton about that yet, but I'm confident that if y'all selected him, he would agree to the same. So I've repeated my letter. I'm sure you all read it, but I'll be glad to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. I'll open up for discussion. Councilmember Mendez.
I just want to make, so Butler Snow, Mr. Stan's firm, it's, we say regional, it's 21 offices, and Nashville's just one of their 21 offices. I just looked while we were here. Right. Would they agree to not have anybody from their Nashville office work on it?
That is their plan. And I spoke with, I know several lawyers there. I spoke with one of their lead attorneys there yesterday, and they made it clear to me that they wanted to have nothing to do with it, but that because they hold their partner in such high esteem, they didn't want to stand in his way of seeking some work that would really fit him well. So yes, they agreed that it would just be their Memphis lawyers that were working on it.
Chair, I mean, I think they're both qualified, and I'm not sure I've got I don't have a clear preference. I mean, I've got a mild preference, but I think I'd rather have the committee talk about it. And I'd probably, if there was a consensus behind either firm, that would be fine with me. If nobody has an opinion, I'll share that, I guess,
All right.
which one I have a preference for.
We'll come back around to if we need to. Councilmember Pulley.
Councilman Mendez brought up one of the issues, and so with respect to the Nashville law firm, let me ask, if we should choose Butler Snow, could we make it a condition that they put some sort of a firewall off to basically exclude them access to anything that goes on, in this case, out of the Memphis office?
I'm sure they would agree to that. It's for a big firm like that, I'm sure it is a typical part of their practice to have to do that, because you have lawyers coming to and from different firms. You have lawyers coming from the private sector into the firm. So I'm sure they've got a very strong practice when it comes to doing that walling off, yeah. And I'm sure that would not be a problem.
And we could make it a condition upon their acceptance that they would give us the same deal as the other firm did with respect to the travel?
I believe so. Yes, I mean, this committee can do whatever they would like. Ultimately, this committee's really just going to be making a recommendation to the council as a whole. So Mr. Jameson would have to draft a resolution, probably to be late filed, attaching some sort of agreement with the law firm, and y'all could make the resolution contingent upon that.
Well, I agree that there's so little that stands between these two firms. They look like two excellent selections to me, and I have very much appreciate what you said about the fees, because you're on target with that. So with that, I'd be interested to hear what Councilman Mendez's preference is between these two. Thank you.
I'll come back to Mr. Mendez. Councilmember Swope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vice Mayor, I have no idea if you know the answer to this question or not, but has either one of these law firms dealt directly or indirectly with this current administration or the past administration? So we're going back 10 years.
Mr. Stanton, I can speak pretty definitively that he has not had any dealings with either. And that's because he told me he had none with this administration, and I believe prior to this administration, he was the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee, and before that, I believe he was in the District Attorney. He's been a Memphis lawyer primarily, so I don't think, I'm confident he has not. The Birch, Porter, and Johnson indicated to me that they really had nothing to do with Nashville, but I did not I did not ask as direct a question as you're asking me, so I can't answer that as directly as you're asking it. But I have, my sense is that they have not had anything to do with either this administration or the prior.
Okay, thank you. I would tend to lean towards the Memphis firm here, Birch Johnson, before Butler Snow, and it also saves, $35 an hour, which may not mean a lot to us, but it means a lot to a lot of people. That's my 3 cents.
Appreciate that. Councilmember Mendez, do you want to respond to Councilmember Pulley's question?
Sure. I have a very slight preference for Birch, Porter, and Johnson. Very, very, very slight preference. And it only comes down to the idea of not having an office here in Nashville. I know a lot of lawyers at Butler Snow here in Nashville, and I have nothing but 100% faith that they would follow the procedures that we laid out and stay completely out of it. But I feel like there's a small chance that we might send the media on a hunting expedition for figuring out what contacts exist, even if we've got their secure promise that their Nashville office won't be involved. I mean, I think Mr. Stanton from Butler Snow would be an exceptional choice. I really do. So just the slightest of preference for Birch Porter that I could be talked out of pretty easily.
It looks like some folks want to talk. Council Member Pulley, I think you're up next.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and thanks for articulating what you said. As far as I'm concerned, it's very, very important that that this be done well, and we pick a highly professional firm who's really experienced at doing these kinds of investigations and doing them right. And I put a high premium on that, and I think looking over the two selections that the Vice Mayor has brought us, either one of these firms, I'm completely confident would achieve what we really want in a law firm like that. So I'm perfectly happy going either way. It sounds like we've got a couple of members on the committee that feel like the Memphis, well, I think they're both Memphis firms, but the one without the Nashville office is the one where we should be targeting. But I do think it's very, very important to note that what's really important is that we do this right, and we get a firm that's very capable of doing this in a professional, in a thorough, and an efficient manner. And both of these firms fit that bill for me, so I'm happy to go either way. Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Johnson. Let's see. There you go. I think I turned you off.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Vice Mayor. I echo everybody's opinion because both of these firms are really qualified. But I do not have a preference, but I'm assuming these kind of investigation they will use as a team. For that, I do appreciate Birch Porter Johnson kind of putting the team as front end instead of selecting the team after it was awarded. So for that reason, I may have slightly leaning towards Birch Porter Johnson. So we will know what kind of team will be, working on this case. So, but I'm open to everybody's opinion as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Haywood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a visual, you talked about Birch, Porter, and Johnson having more experience, and just by virtue of looking at it, I can tell there's probably more experience. But I'm just interested in you elaborating on Stanton and the level of resources. You feel like there are a little more resources with Stanton? I'd like to just hear a little bit more about that.
Yes. So I think Councilman Mendez pointed out they have 21 offices. They probably have, I don't know how many lawyers. If they've got 21 offices, they probably are getting, they have hundreds of lawyers, maybe 1,000 lawyers. I don't, you think that many, Bob? Probably not that many. He's looking. So when you hire a big law firm like that, generally, if there is a question that comes up, no matter what the question is, somebody is going to have worked on that before. I'm frankly, so that's why somebody hiring a lawyer might go with a bigger firm, is that you're going to get an expert on everything. So that's what I was getting at when I talked about more resources. It's not so much that they've got better photocopiers or anything. It's more just about human resources.
Thank you. I'd like to just follow up with, does the fact that one resume was submitted with Butler Snow mean he probably would choose some other people to be on a team, or that he would be focused on that, primarily his own efforts?
I'm confident that he would have a team. We did not talk about that as much. But he is a member there at the firm, and he's going to need. He's not just going to be working on this case. He's going to need some lower billing lawyers to help him on it. And so I now can say definitively he will have other lawyers, because he talked to me about other lawyers billing at a lower rate. So yes, he would have other lawyers.
Okay, so we're not really comparing 4 lawyers versus 1 lawyer. We just have.
No, he just happened to submit. His submission just included him, but I'm confident he would have other lawyers
Great.
working with him.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Pulley, are you back in the queue? All right, you're recognized.
Yes, based on what I'm hearing, I would just like to go ahead and move that we, as a committee, recommend Birch, Porter, and Johnson as the firm that we present to council.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? All those in favor of Birch, Porter, raise your hand. Opposed? Abstaining? Did you get that count? Okay. Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. We know you did a lot of work. We appreciate you doing all the research for us. With that, our next item of business is to review the proposed scope. Councilmember Mendez, you want to be recognized?
I'd like to, on that last item that we were just wrapping up, to make a motion that you work with Mr. Jamison to prepare a late filed resolution for next Tuesday to approve the hiring.
Okay, seconded? Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, we will get on that. Thank you. So with that, we'll move on to ask Mr. Swan, perhaps if he can, could we get you to come up here and officially present? So at Councilmember Mendez's request, even before this committee was formed, he had asked Mr. Swan if he were to do an investigation, what were the items that would be included, and that list has now been elaborated now that he's been officially requested by us. We've seen a version of that official proposal, so I would ask Mr. Swan if you could just kind of walk us through the highlights of that, knowing that based on our conversation at our last meeting that we'll want to refine this as the selected firm defines their scope to make sure that there's not any overlap, that we're not doing anything twice. But this will be our starting point for Mr. Swans. If you can kind of run through the highlights of it, and then we'll have a Q&A after that. I'm not sure which mic is live there. I'll try to give you both. Take your pick. I think you need to use the handheld one. Over there to your right now.
Yes, I'm Mark Swan, Metropolitan Auditor for the Metropolitan Nashville Government. As stated, Mr. Mendez had asked shortly after the press release what kind of separation of duties that we could do working on an investigation with assistance from whoever. And I had come up with a list in and refined it a little bit, added a couple items as new things came about the travel authorization forms having the wrong approval levels. So that was added since then. And so there's 2 areas we're looking at: security, detail, payroll. We feel like we're familiar with payroll processes in the metropolitan government. We could go and look at the scheduling system and get the information of gathering how work schedules are done for the security detail, how those are approved, what our policies are, what policies are in compliance or out of compliance, provide that information to you. In addition to that, we could look at the travel expenses, again, credit card what's being paid by credit card. Most of it's paid by credit cards, but other sources of resource that are used to pay for travel, identify those, list those out, and schedule those, and provide that to you. And then the last item was on the standard of conduct, which was before a lot of this other stuff came up, but on employee standard of conduct as a potential that we would do an historical investigation that we do with other departments. But I just put this here on the list, but ideally I believe that would be more in tune for your attorney counsel to do that part, and I would not recommend you have that in my letter. And so that's the highlights of it. We're proposing an agreed upon procedure, which would mean that we will do these procedures, give you those results. We'll let you know if there is compliance with existing metro policy or not metro policy, and then leave it at that. We would potentially, if there's always emerging issues that are outside of this, or you add new items to it, we can work from there. So the emerging issues would be, we would at least see if there's some predication to come back to you to say, does it need to be expanded or not? And then you can make that decision and we can go forward.
And my understanding is we could handle that in a letter, adding that to the current agreement. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
You can be amended at any time, so.
Very good. Councilmember Pulley?
Just wanted to confirm and address that and some others, because when I look at this document, including Schedule A, represents what you believe to be the scope of this investigation. Is that correct?
At the high level, well, yes, I guess from my perspective, starting
Okay.
off. It's
All right.
To be precise, that would be your part of the scope of this investigation. Is that correct?
Yeah, excluding the standards of conduct.
Right. Mhm. But you view this as a scope document. That's what I'm getting at. Is that correct?
I would say, yes, that's,
All right,
that's the
okay.
purpose of an agreed upon procedure.
right.
Ideally, you should come up and tell me what you want me to do, and then.
Right. I guess the point I'm trying to make is, when I look at this, I see Schedule A more as, in my old world, this looks like an investigative plan that we would put together at the beginning of an investigation like this, or examination, or whatever you want to call it. And I know these things are fluid, meaning that you can never anticipate everything you need to do on the front end. So one thing may lead you to something that you didn't really know you had to do. So is your suggestion, based on what I'm hearing you and Council Lady Allen talk about here, you're going to come back to us if this needs to be amended, or do you have the luxury of going ahead and
Well, ideally, I would prefer
using
to
this as
come
a-
back and have it amended.
Okay.
But, I would do some preliminary work to make sure it was justified that additional work needed to be done.
All right, so if anything at all that's outside the definition of what you put down in Schedule A, you're going to come back to us to get it amended rather than going off and doing it. I'm perfectly fine with you doing what you need to do to get to the answers, but.
Yeah, this is, to me, to protect me, I
Right.
think it's best for me to say I only do what you've instructed me to do, and then if I see something else that needs to be done, come back and make a request to you and justify why additional work needs to be done.
Well, then, I think it's important, Madam Chair, that if things like this do come up, we can get to this expeditiously, so that we're not having to wait 2 weeks for a meeting to give him
think
those
that's
marching orders, so.
Mr. Jameson, can you suggest a process that would, in a transparent way, allow us to adjust the scope? Well, there you go.
The scope is now set within the resolution that was passed previously by the council. That can obviously be amended, or rather you'd submit a new resolution for the submission of a more broadly expanded scope. I read the terminology to be fairly broad. I would be hard pressed to think of some item that hasn't been discussed in this committee or considered in the media that doesn't fit within the parameters of what the scope says now. But if there's any question, that can be addressed with a subsequent resolution if necessary.
Thank you.
So if my understanding of that is, it's really not necessary if you find something in addition to what you've enumerated here on Schedule A to come back and get permission to go out and do it. You can just go and, within the framework of the scope of the resolution, conduct that, or do you have to come back here?
based on my standards that I'm following, I would have to come back to you and have an amendment. But, I mean, there's other ways to do it. You could delegate that to your council, and then I go to that council, and if they approve it, then
Okay,
you can.
all right.
you
Well,
don't have to
again,
have
I
to go
just,
through you.
I just say, if that's the case, let's do it in an expeditious manner. And the only other thing I'd have to say is, it does say other personnel with respect to interviews, but I would just generally recommend that with respect to the interviews, I would think it'd be prudent for us to get the law firm on board and coordinate all that with the law firm rather than moving forward with interviews at this point in time. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay,
In fact, you're
all right.
reading my mind. That's what I would hope to
I don't have
happen.
anything else. Thank you.
Great, that sounds good. Just to recap the question of additional scope, and I see Councilmember Miz wants to speak as well. Should Mr. Swan discover something he feels like has not been spelled out in the document we have before us, can we kind of set up a procedure for him to communicate either with you or with me? You help me figure out what makes sense in the scope of how we do this. And then if we can do this by email, what would you suggest, Mr. Jameson? So that we don't have, as Mr. Pulley has said, so that we don't have to wait 2 weeks for the next meeting.
Mr. Swan and I are in certainly not weekly communication, but frequent communication on a wide variety of things, and know each other's phone numbers. And to the extent he senses he needs expansion of his scope to feel comfortable, I can have the resolution as a late filed manner if necessary, or filed accordingly. I would comment just in terms of how I've seen investigations go in the past. First, it is document intensive on the front end. No one gets to interview portions until every syllable has been reviewed in terms of the documentation. I would imagine that would apply to Mr. Swan and to the council. Secondly, to the extent scope matters are addressed, it's usually raised as a defensive mechanism by the person being investigated, that is beyond the scope. I would not envision that here, but I may be wrong. But there are procedures that can be applied in the event a scope expansion is needed.
Thank you. And I guess one more just to beat a dead horse. It seems like we're sort of operating between a very precise spelled out document here and a very broad document from the council resolution that covers perhaps a number of things that are not necessarily spelled out here, but are covered by the council resolution, so that they would not necessarily require another resolution, but perhaps would at least require communicating with us as a committee so that we can all agree that, yes, that is an appropriate thing for Mr. Swan to add to his scope. Can that be handled by communication through you to the rest of the committee? Your thoughts on that?
I imagine that shortly after this meeting, there will be a discussion between Mr. Swan and Birch, Porter, and Johnson, and that Birch Porter will have some suggestions and insights on what they're covering, so to speak, and if they see any lapses in where they need to go or believe they need to go, we'll hear that quickly. And to the extent, again, that a resolution needs to be submitted to expand the scope, we can set that up
We can do
quickly.
that. Okay. I think that sounds like a plan. Councilmember Mendez.
Thanks. I think, well, we've got, for this idea that you're just mentioning, that if there's something that could potentially be investigated that is more than what is in the written document before us today, but less than in the resolution, how do we get expanded? I think we've got multiple backstops in place, but I think Mr. Swan's suggestion of working something out, a delegation of power to the lawyer we just hired, talked about hiring, is probably the way to go.
Okay.
I think working through Mr. Jameson would ultimately be ineffective because we couldn't vote on it in a non-public setting, so we'd have to wait for the meeting, the next meeting. So I think what makes sense is that when we have the lawyer here, that we say, if there's something that's beyond the written document today, but still within the realm of the resolution, that if it makes sense to you in your professional judgment, go ahead and authorize Mr. Swan to get going on it, and then have a reporting requirement where the next time we meet, the lawyer and/or Mr. Swan will let us know. There's also an additional backstop. When the audit committee last met, the directions to Mr. Swan were to work out scope with this committee. But if there ended up being road bumps, speed bumps along the way where he thought something needed to be looked into, and the committee didn't, or vice versa, that he was to go back to the audit committee for further direction. Okay. So Mr. Swan, for some reason, the committee were being non-responsive or not moving quickly enough. Mr. Swan's got direction from the audit committee to go talk to them. That's also a small group that can move quickly. So I think we've got plenty of backstops here if we need to expand it. I would like to go ahead and make a motion that there's three parts to this motion. Part one is to approve Mr. Swan to go ahead with the written scope that he provided, minus the employee standards, and also not yet conducting any interviews. Part two would be to meet with Birch Porter and come back to this committee proposing how and when interviews would take place and who would conduct them. And part three of the motion would be to give the chair of the committee authority to amend the scope document that Mr. Swan provided us and go ahead and sign it on behalf of the committee to get him going.
Sounds good. Mr. Jameson, did you get all three of those parts?
I did not get number three.
Can
Give
you-
the chair permission?
Mr. Swan provided a scope document for us to sign to get him going, which is his normal procedure. And part three would be to have the chair of the committee and Mr. Jameson and Mr. Swan amend the scope document to reflect what we've given authority for. And rather than having all 7 committee members sign, to have the chair sign on behalf of the committee.
Okay, got it.
So duly moved and seconded. More discussion? Councilmember Haywood, do you want to speak to that motion? There you are.
You covered everything, every question I had. You covered it, yeah.
We're good. Any further discussion on the motion to respond to the letter? Okay, and just to reiterate, that motion, I believe, is to approve Mr. Swan to go ahead with the written statement minus the code of conduct and the interviews. Second, to have them meet with the council once they are hired and define the 2 scopes between them. And third, to authorize the chair and Mr. Jameson to amend the scope that's been presented and sign it with a single signature. So, did I get that? All right. It's been moved and seconded and reiterated. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is recommended. Does that require a second resolution or simply us signing the letter? Okay. We are good. Our next order of business then is to figure out what our next order of business is. Thank you very much, Mr. Swan. We appreciate you delineating this out so effectively. As we talk about, before you leave, Mr. Swan, as we talk about when our next meeting should be, some input from you on when you think you might have new information to tell us with regard to either meeting with the council or having begun to gather information. 2 weeks? Tomorrow? 1 day? I'm sure that's true. Councilmember Mendez, you...
I mean, I don't want to be, there's a strong public interest in keeping this moving, and I'd be willing to make the bet that the council is going to approve the hiring of the lawyer next Tuesday, and there's nothing stopping Mr. Swan from talking to Birch Porter before then, and so I would say a week, because I think the thing we want to hear next is, like, we want to lay eyeballs on the lawyer and have him talk to us, and I think we want to hear something about the interview process, and even if it's, we'll decide after we look at documents, which will take a month, which may well be what they say, but I think it's important that if we can do it in a week, that we go ahead and come back and do it and keep the process moving forward.
I agree it's important to keep the process moving forward. I believe Councilmember Johnson and I will be out of town next Thursday. Could we talk y'all into meeting on a Friday? That's a terrible idea. Councilmember Swope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are you in Wednesday?
I apologize for that.
How
Might
about
I
that next
suggest
Monday,
we
the
meet
12th?
after the council meeting Tuesday night?
Tuesday night. Well, Tuesday night, he will not have had a chance to meet with the, well, he may have had a chance to.
I would think between now and Tuesday, Mr. Swan, would you have the opportunity to at least reach out and have a conversation with the proposed law firm in Memphis? I would think they'd make a schedule available to you.
Right.
And I know that's going to be a really long day for us, but as Councilman Mendez says, people want to see this moving forward. And
I think that's
I
very
would
true.
rather put in the extra hours to keep it moving forward and at least get to some ultimate resolution sometime before budget starts.
That's a good plan. That would assume passage of the resolution. And so I think we perhaps need to have Plan A and Plan B and go ahead and set those in motion. Plan A would be it passes, which we expect it will, and we meet immediately at the conclusion of the council meeting. Thank you for your flexibility. And Plan B is it does not pass, and we schedule another meeting at that point. Okay, and in time to have it publicly noticed, which perhaps would be the following Thursday. And we could go ahead and think about every Thursday from now on and try to keep those clear now that we know we're in this adventure. Mr. Swan, does that sound workable to you, if not ideal? You are. We appreciate your flexibility too. Okay. Okay, I think that's what we decided then. All right, I have 3 people in the queue, and I'm not sure if that's because I haven't cleared you out. Raise your hand if you still wish to speak. All right, I'm clearing everybody out then. We'll start over again. So to recap, what we have decided is we will have a resolution stating that we want to hire these lawyers. We will go ahead and begin contact with them in the hopes that we can have some discussion about what the scope might be immediately after the council meeting on Tuesday night. We'll have donuts. Or at least chocolate candy.
So he will, and I will already go ahead and contact Birch Porter and have them
I'll let you say that officially.
if I understand correctly, Mr. Swan and I will help facilitate contact with Birch Porter, and they will have some preliminary discussions about essentially how they work together. And then Tuesday, we will be prepared for, I assume one of the 4 attorneys will be available to be here on Tuesday. That's short notice for an attorney, but that's one of the 4 should be able to be here. And assuming resolution passage, then confirm their scope and how they're working together.
I think that sounds like a plan, knowing that we might need a little bit of flexibility, so we'll try to adjust. So that's the immediate next step. I would say in terms of other long-term things, perhaps let's go ahead and count on meeting weekly simply because people are interested in seeing where we go. We may adjust to that once we sort of discover how quickly information comes in, if that sounds reasonable. Okay. Councilmember Swope.
You can take it away.
Done? Okay. Any other thoughts or comments?
Next meeting.
Okay, so the next meeting is officially set for next Tuesday at 7:30 because it's going to be another efficient council meeting. No, it ain't. 10 o'clock. Thursdays seem to work fairly well unless people have a lot of things on Planning Commission. Shall we stick with Thursdays? 4:30, 4, 5, 4:30, okay.
Including next week when you will have met on.
No. So we will meet on Tuesday, and then we meet on March 8th. Is that right? No, March 15th.
For this, yes.
Would then be the second following meeting at 4:30 here in council chambers. March 15th. 22nd, 29th. Okay.
That's right.
Any other business? Thank you. Good work. We'll see you Tuesday. You're adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.